any questions you would post in the chat so that we can create a frequently asked questions and provide it as a follow-up to the recording as well. So if you do have concerns in regards to the recording and the transcript, you can exit now. But honestly, this is a way for us to, as I think of it, is a way to re-engage the community in a sense, a citizens participation portion of what we would do in the community development block grant program on the federal level. It has been some time since we've put the action plan together, and this is an opportunity to work with our partners that we will introduce in a moment. Good morning. I hope everyone stayed warm, and I'm going to turn it over to our leader extraordinaire. I think she is managing the slides, Grace and Grant.
Awesome. Thanks so much for kicking off, Miguel. Melina will get started here in a moment, but we have a big group of folks here today, and we're so happy all of you were able to make it. If you wouldn't mind just introducing yourselves in the chat, which organization you're kind of calling in from today, that'd be great. So just to get a sense of where everyone's coming from. And I will be the slide master for today. So if I'm behind, you just let me know. But Melina, we're ready when you are.
All right, thank you. I'm just seeing all the chat introductions coming in. Thank you, everybody, for being here today. Let's go ahead to the introduction slide. Thank you. Miguel and Diana, I don't know that you know everybody in this room or in this chat or meeting. Do you want to do a quick introduction about yourselves and, you know, why we're here today and maybe how we got here today?
Thank you very much. Yes, I'd like to just do a very simple introduction, but also an acknowledgement. My name is Miguel Rivera. I am the Director of Housing and Community Development with the Department of Housing. The Recovery Housing Program is an amazing opportunity for us, and you're going to learn more about it. But how did I, the bricks and mortar guy, get involved with a recovery housing program? Well, it's based on the Community Development Block Grant federal regulations. So just like the Life cereal TV commercials from the 70s, give it to Miguel, he'll like it. And I worked with Steve DeLella, Michael Santoro, and a variety of stakeholders to develop the action plan some years ago. Diana Berube works with Steve DeLella and is assisting me with staff support with regards to the recovery housing program. I would like to acknowledge, before turning it over to the Fletcher Group, our Hartford field office representatives, and if they would like to come on and speak for a moment. Joseph Linhart, who is the manager of the community planning development, and Philip McHugh, who is the field director of the Hartford field office. If you'd like to turn your cameras on, please do. Or if you're shy, we can continue, get back to you.
Miguel, I'm here.
Yeah, thanks, Miguel. I'll let Joe go ahead. I'm actually in transit, but yeah, Joe, take it away. Thank you, Miguel. We're really excited that this is happening. This is well. Thanks.
Again, heard from our CPD director, Phil McHugh, and I am the program manager and also the for the rep for the state of Connecticut. Of course, we've had several years allocation of RHP, and that money, of course, we are always anxious to try to see that money spent. in a way that, of course, is compliant, but of course helps the community. And we're excited, Miguel, that you were able to put this together because we are anxious to see some movement on these funds. I know there's been some challenges, and hopefully this can start moving the ship in the right direction. So thank you for making this happen today.
Thank you so much, Joseph. And thank you, Philip. And if it wasn't for your support and the kick in the pants, we would not have gotten here today. But it's very exciting that we are here and we have a whole new sense of energy and sense of urgency. I turn it over now back to Melina and the Fletcher Group for their introduction.
All right, thank you so much, Miguel. My name is Melina Stott. I have worked at the Fletcher Group since 2019, supporting the development of recovery housing across rural communities in the U.S. For this project, I'm an implementation advisor, and what that means is that I'm working with awardees and sub-awardees in their implementation process. So that's part of our engagement today, is to support the movement of implementing recovery housing here in Connecticut. And what that means is we can provide support at all different levels, and we'll go through that in the presentation. But first, I'd love for my colleague Grace and Grant to say a little bit about themselves.
Hi, everyone. My name is Grace Clancy. I've been at the Fletcher Group for almost 6 years now. And for most of my time there, really focusing on project coordination, program evaluation, and research among recovery housing projects. So really looking forward to working with all of you. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm a project manager with Fletcher Group. Been with the group about 8 years, and my background's in economic development. So I'm more like Miguel, more of the bricks and sticks side of things. I'm also a city planner, so I'm aware of the challenges that communities have with implementing recovery housing. So excited to be here today.
All right, thank you, Grant and Grace. My background is in social work, so I'm a licensed social worker, and I do the program development and Medicaid side of things. So when we look at, recovery housing, and we'll talk a little bit about that today, we're looking at both the bricks and mortar and the services that are happening within the setting. So we've already done some introductions and acknowledgements. We're going to go into the program background and the opportunity for funding that's coming up related to this. In that, we're going to talk about the program need and how to define that, and looking at the national standards and resources that support the development. We'll talk a little bit about the performance agreement and what that means, if you're awarded the funding, and what the reporting and auditing requirements look like. And then we'll move into kind of the next steps in the application process, including some review of compliance and federal requirements that will help facilitate the application process in an expeditious ways. And then at the end, we hope to have some questions and a rich discussion about next steps for this program. All right, let's move on, Grace. All right, so who is the Fletcher Group? So we, as part of the Recovery Housing Program, provide support to communities as a recovery housing center of excellence. So what that means is we're working in communities to help them quickly understand and set up the HUD requirements related to this program, including the program models and development support. As an organization, we offer both training and technical assistance. So we'll have a series of webinars through HUD that will help communities understand the development phases of the project and how to navigate some of the challenges that come up naturally. We also support organizations in selecting practices that are based on best practices and evidence, and then also to drive innovation, looking at how we change and improve things through both research and education. All right, next slide, please. So how do we partner with your communities? So we look at what your defined program goals are, and we'll look at what those are for Connecticut. Really, the general focus is around providing housing stability and income progression, and exit into stable housing. And so through partnerships and engaging with service providers, we help, engage in practices that achieve client outcomes. We look at how we blend funding in the different programs to support continuity and sustainability. The RHP funding is one component of recovery housing funding. There are other funding components that go into it. So really sitting down with partners to look at those funding stacks, looking at their partnerships, their local and community resources that can be blended in to support the project. And sometimes that begins with a community assessment. Sometimes communities already have that assessment, and you can move on into engagement into the strategic program goals. For rural communities, we're funded under the HRSA side of the house to provide intensive project management support to projects that are developing. Typically because we find that rural and frontier communities are under-resourced in those resources, and hope to provide them that support to move their projects forward. All right, next slide, please. In this community here, we've already sat down with Miguel and noticed that there's a strong partnership, and that's evidenced by the number of folks who are here attending this meeting today. But some key partners in your community that, within recovery housing, we like to broaden it to this recovery ecosystem, right? The different components in the community that support the home. DEMIS, the Department of DEMIS, and I'm so sorry, I'm not going to know that acronym, but they are the behavioral health agency and providers that really end up providing the Medicaid and other services for the folks that are coming into the recovery housing program. Department of Corrections is another common partner. They have reentry programs and funding, sometimes rental assistance vouchers for folks that are entering into recovery homes. Same with the courts and the judicial systems. They're often looking, toward these homes as partners and supporting people in reducing recidivism and reentering into the community. Thank you so much, Diana. Then you have the state opioid programs, which are often providing funding for the services and also the housing. In your community, you have the HERO program and the Social Equity Council, and of course, the HUD partners that were introduced. When we look at the outcomes for the RHP program, that ties in to broader COC and balance of state goals around creating the housing continuums that we want to see available for folks. And we'll talk a little bit about that further on as well. So in terms of this program, it was established by the Support Act to basically help individuals in recovery from substance use become stably housed within the program. And so the program subsidizes or authorizes assistance to provide funding for housing and acquisition and rehabilitation of property. The program was reauthorized in 2025, which is great news. In terms of the program standards, in order to be eligible for the recovery housing program and related funding, individuals must be directly impacted by substance use disorder and be 51% or more of low moderate income. And so people who meet the federal poverty guideline or are insured by Medicaid are eligible and fall under this requirement. So the funding appropriation for Connecticut over the years has been about $6.6 million. And the eligible activities within the action plan are listed here. And this is straight out of the action plan. And it's for the focus of developing and maintaining stable and temporary housing for individuals. Priorities given to projects that demonstrate the highest need and have a plan in place to move the funding forward. So the recovery housing notification of funding opportunity, again, the purpose is to assist those low to moderate income individuals become stably housed and will become available in early Q2 of this coming year, so the springtime. So how does your state define recovery housing? We'll go over to the Support Act definition, but it's important to also note your state's definition. Oftentimes, definitions are tied to funding and accreditation requirements and state standards. And so it's important to know your state's definition. So your state's definition of a sober living home means an alcohol and drug-free residence where unrelated adults who are recovering from substance use disorder choose to live together in a supportive environment during the recovery, and no formal substance use disorder treatment services are provided. The department oversees the registry. And then collaborators in the state are seen as recovery housing as a component of a continuum that promotes recovery. And so it is tied into the balance of state plan and the Opening Doors Fairfield County work that is more local. It is also tied to state and opioid goals around reducing overdoses. Next slide, please. The Support Act defines recovery housing as a shared living environment free from alcohol and illicit drug use, centered on peer support, and that's a key focus. Because it is a best practice, and connection to services that promote sustained recovery from substance use disorder. So the plan and the legislation calls for collaboration and this braided services into the setting. So the funding can help provide assistance for up to 2 years, but it doesn't have to be 2 years, or until the individual secures permanent housing, whichever is earlier. Now, while you may choose to provide assistance for less than 2 years, it's important to note that the outcome of success is exit into permanent or secure housing. So the goal isn't to provide assistance to folks temporarily to have them re-exit into other settings. And so when we look at program standards and program plans and applications, we're looking to understand that there's connection to the continuum and that folks have considered the key outcome, which is exit into secure or permanent housing. Next slide, please. When we look at recovery housing and we work with organizations looking to establish recovery housing, we often ask them to reference the NAR standards. So NAR is the National Alliance for Recovery Residences. Most states have an affiliate, your state does. And they were basically founded to set up the national standards, support the certification of homes to make sure that when we send people into these settings, they are promoting their recoveries. They offer training and support to operators, stakeholders, they advise policymakers, and really their goal is to ensure accountability through ethics and quality frameworks. And so this national network and state networks have really advanced the quality and standards of recovery homes. And we ask that organizations working in the field reference their standards. Some states have tied certification and other requirements to state funding. All right, next slide, please. We also, when working with individuals, like to point out the connection to ASAM and their standards, the American Society of Addiction Medicine, and they partnered with NAR to look at recovery housing within the continuum of care, and their fourth edition promotes the recovery support services standards, including the recovery housing levels of care, which we'll go over in a little bit. But basically, this is tied to funding in some states. And it also defines who's entering services and why are they entering services, and what is the typical guideline or standard of care when they're entering these settings. And so while NAR speaks to the settings and the overall ethical framework and principles of recovery housing, ASAM takes it to the level of, these are the types of services and types of individuals that should be happening across these different levels of care. All right, next slide, please. So when you look at their partnership and recovery housing and what they established, so a level 1, or the lowest level, or formerly known as level 1, is peer run. A level 2 is monitored. A level 3 is supervised, and a level 4 is clinical. Those are typically known as residential treatment facilities that are licensed by the state. What is common across all these settings is that they're a housing model. So less medical, more community-based. They emphasize the social model of recovery support, which means that they're hiring peers and promoting a community of safety and accountability. There's often urine drug screens happening at these homes. When you enter the monitored environment, you're typically adding a house manager and some recovery support services. When you enter a supervised model, you're adding the life skills component, the employment supports, the things that typically need to happen if we want to see people exit successfully into the community. Typically, employment is a prerequisite to being able to afford housing. So in supervised settings, you're adding that additional level of support. And then, of course, the level 4 is for folks who need all of those things, but they also may need some clinical services or case management or oversight of their health or behavioral health conditions. All right, next slide, please. There's staffing levels and recommendations for all of those levels in the new guidance. When you look at the model overall, and what we see is that it addresses a critical gap for folks who need a supportive environment to maintain their recovery and sobriety. It also lowers housing costs for individuals who live in that shared environment. So it's, we have some Oxford homes where folks are living there 5, 6+ years because of just the cost of living in their community. It creates a supportive environment that, really focuses on mutual accountability and helping folks reintegrate into the community by emphasizing life skills, conflict resolution, goal setting, and that sort of thing. And it's often a soft landing for people to end up at when they're leaving corrections or treatment centers, and they're not necessarily tied to a community, and they need some sort of supportive community to re-engage. All right, next slide. So when you look at recovery housing, you see people entering from the criminal justice system. And so these are the partnerships we want to see in an application, right? Who's referring them there? Is it the criminal justice system, the providers? Is it a community-based organization? How are people coming in? And then within the application, the program model, right? How are the case management and peer support and other services being delivered either internally or through partnerships? Because what we know of the population is that often folks need those, a combination of those things. And then what are the outcomes? When folks are leaving, are they leaving to employment, housing, and making sure that those things are available in your community and that the program is connected to them. You're also focusing on transportation and social support and making sure that folks are able to access employment and health services because there's adequate transportation. And as a community, when you're coming together and developing a project, you know, those might be the folks that you want at the table to help see that project be a success. And that's why the recovery ecosystem is important. So while the home can deliver those things, and that's the program model, you still need the community and the engagement and the treatment providers and kind of the wraparound support, connection to employment services. And of course, you know, in our work, we always say you want the proof. So when you're setting up these programs, and HUD has their metrics, right, that we'll go over in a little bit as well, but the proof that these things are working. And so who might participate in that within your local communities? I mean, I think many of you are here, so I'm not going to go over, you know, bit by bit, but the key components to it, you know, are folks who understand housing, folks who understand services, are setting up the programs, and they're partnering with these different components in the community, whether they're referring into the program or, you know, when it comes to exiting the program, supporting those outcomes. Next slide, please. So how does recovery housing fit in the communities of care? The goal is for it to, you know, for folks to come into a system and they're assessed for their needs and their desires, and that continuum is offered to folks, and that policies allow them to select the settings, and those settings are available. And so in an application process, one of the things that we ask folks or recommend that folks do is look at your continuum and the gaps in your continuum, and as well as the data and the people in your community and what their needs are and what they're asking for. This program was founded because some folks prefer an abstinence-focused environment, and they state that that's a preference that they need. And so our goal is to provide a housing first opportunity for them to enter, you know, recovery housing with the typical supportive programs that are inherent to the model. And so the key difference here is that folks are selecting this environment. The programs are embedded within the setting, and the services are embedded within the setting. And the goal is really this supportive environment where folks are talking about their recovery and receiving those life skills supports. So in an application process, awardees enter an agreement at the end of the award decisions. And basically that agreement guides the compliance and the monitoring terms. Miguel and his team would work closely, and the Fletcher Group has the opportunity to also engage in making sure that folks who receive the funding understand the monitoring requirements and are well equipped to be able to document those outcomes effectively for the program. So not only are we looking at the application process and the program components as ensuring, you know, the critical success factors that need to
Oh, Melina, are you back?
I'm back. I'm going to go off camera.
Okay, we lost you right at critical success factors, if that helps.
I'm back. Okay, where did you lose me?
At critical success factors.
Okay. Not only is the application process or the NOFA process set up to review that the applicants have the critical success factors in place, and there will be, you know, a webinar at that point to kind of talk about and walk through the application process. But we also provide reporting templates that help people document what HUD wants to see to ensure the program goals are met. All right, next slide. So in terms of audit requirements, we've worked with programs that are smaller and have never been subject to a federal audit because they've never received funding over a certain threshold. And this is here so that potential applicants know that, if you are an organization that receives more than $1 million in federal funding, you're subject to a federal audit. And this just lists, the citations on what the requirements are and references for those citations. Next slide. Performance monitoring and reporting. We've already talked about this a little bit, but basically all of those forms are provided through the assistance agreement and people are onboarded for that. It's been our experience that sometimes, there's some translation that needs to happen around HUD requirements because you see service providers who haven't received HUD funding in the past, for example. And so, the team, the key takeaway is don't let that be what intimidates one from applying. That support is offered in the process. Just know that even though it can be intimidating, it's very manageable with the right setup. Next slide. So in terms of the general application process, when you look at the typical application, we're looking at a project narrative that establishes demonstrated need, that talks about the program model that they have and the outcomes that are a result of that model. It also includes a budget. And that budget is really looking at sources and uses. How do the RHP funds come in? What other, that blended funding toward that sustainability that we want to see? Are there agreements in place for other funding sources or partners? Have you done an environmental scan to determine the feasibility? A typical application looks at resumes in the project team. We want to see that the team includes all of the members that need to be in place for success. Procurement becomes a big question in some of these. So, having procurement policies in place, we can provide guidance on HUD procurement requirements. Are there project designs? Do you have control over the site? Those are the things that we're looking for. All right. In terms of application scoring and domain, this is a sample of what the typical domains of an application look like. It's a lot of what I covered, so what's the population need and profile? Is it folks with substance use disorder? What are their income levels? What are their other needs? And then what's your program design? Does your program address those needs? What are your program outcomes? What's the location? Is it an underserved region? Does your program provide a safe, healthy living environment? Are you able to leverage other resources? Is there community support for the program? Is there coordination with government agencies and providers? Are they ready to spend the funding once awarded? Are there trained staff and peer support embedded into the program? What's the project's long-term viability? And what's the program's capacity? So when looking at the application questions will ask the applicants to define how their program is doing each of those things, and will provide guidance on how to, address or what to include. And the scoring domains will reflect that as well. Next slide, please. All right. So there are minimum qualifications and requirements that will be released with the RFP. All right, I think this is where I turn it over to Miguel.
I'm just going to adjust my screen a little bit because I've got multiple screens. Good morning, everyone. I'm hoping you're all enjoying this, helping maybe get a cup of coffee, keep us awake. It's the nuts and bolts of the program, and we need to talk about federal requirements. The federal requirements do differ in many cases and are more restrictive than state requirements. In this particular case, we're going to start off with an environmental review process. In the beginning, as we're having initial conversations with you, we are not going to have you start a full assessment. We're going to have you focus on the project description, a review of the exempt activities and the activities that are not subject to. This will help us develop your understanding of the process, and if your project would be to be invited to move forward, and to limit the amount of financial risk that you would have to take on. But all recovery housing project activities must comply with NEPA, the National Environmental Protection Act, and those are under HUD Regulations 24 CFR Part 58. We also have a guidebook available, and that will be made available as a part of the follow-up, that talks about the NEPA process in the context of the Community Development Block Grant. An environmental review must be completed before construction, rehabilitation, or other choice limiting actions. So, like the fun game Monopoly, do not pass go, do not collect $200. The environmental review is the alpha and the omega, the beginning and the end of a project. So please contact us and speak to us as to where you are in your project process and how to meet the compliance requirements for the NEPA. The funds cannot be committed until HUD issues an environmental clearance. It's referenced as the release of funds process, but at the end, we get the authorization for use of grant funds. This applies for acquisition, rehabilitation, construction activities funded under the Recovery Housing Program. And projects must comply with 24 CFR Part 58, often requiring a unit of local government to act as a responsible entity. In this case, you don't need to reach out to your local municipality. You're more than welcome to, but the Department of Housing would take on that role as the responsible entity and work with the HUD field office for the environmental review, sign off, and authorization process. Next slide, please. Some things that we'd like to highlight. In many cases, you do have clients that are adults, well over the age of 6, but you may have people who visit them, family, friends, children under the age of 6, individuals who might be pregnant. You might have staff that they themselves have families. So we want to make sure that not only the residential, but the entire site is safe of hazardous conditions. With that being said, if the property was built before 1978, we will be looking at having a risk assessment done with regards to lead paint. Additionally, other hazardous materials that we would want to work with you in identifying in your review would include radon, asbestos, underground storage tanks, and other nearby contaminations, meaning were there spills, from an abutting parcel that might have been a commercial use, like a dry cleaner, and there's information that identifies a potential hazard. Radon testing will be required for all residential acquisitions, rehab, and new construction. Even if it's a mixed use, we're going to want you to do radon testing. Mitigation required if action levels are exceeded. Earlier this year, in regards to lead paint dust, there is a more restrictive requirement that we will make you aware of if we're a project that would include rehabilitation. And there's also a more restrictive radon level. The magic number used to be 4 or below. With the review from the EPA, the World Health Organization, that number has dropped dramatically, that we want to try and get it to 2 and below. And obviously, documentation is always critical in preparing our files. Next slide, please. Other federal requirements, we continue. Procurement, procurement, procurement. Many of your organizations have your own procurement standards. If you're not familiar with the federal procurement standards, please send us an email so that we can provide you more guidance and information. But very simply, there are various stages. One of them, which could include a micro purchase, have different requirements based on the dollar threshold. Requires, in most cases, what we will require for your projects is a full and open competition, identifying cost reasonableness and written procurement procedures that from your organization. Contractors and vendors must not be debarred or suspended or identified as, well, we've always worked with them and he's given us a good price. That's not procurement. Conflicts of interest must be identified and avoided. Subrecipients must adhere to the CFR regulations, promoting open, competitive, and inclusion of minority, women-owned, veteran-owned, and all the other owned business structures. We also have access to the CHORO team, the Commission on Human Rights office, who would be happy to provide an additional follow-up training and guidance in regards to the procurement process and the appropriate outreach to go out to the minority and small business communities. Next slide, please. And we continue with federal requirements. Section 3, we provide opportunities for training and employment that must be provided for low-income residents, especially those receiving assistance. The Uniform Relocation Act. There's also a Connecticut Uniform Relocation Act. They're both very similar. And if we utilize federal and state funding dollars, we would have to overlap and assure that the most restrictive of the two would be applicable and assure that we meet all the compliance requirements. But if we are going to be displacing residents or staff, we should have a conversation, as that has to be part of your budget. And there are requirements as to the notification process. Citizen participation. Public hearings and comment periods are required prior to an application submission. As I said earlier, today marks, in a sense, the re-engagement of stakeholders, citizen participation as to the program, as we're looking to redevelop the NOFA or NOFA in the next couple weeks. Next slide, please. My favorite word, it used to be, people made fun of me because I would say it at least a dozen times, Baba. And it's not Baba from the song Ba Ba Barang, but Baba. The Build America, Buy American Act, which was through the Biden administration, requires that all steel, iron, manufactured projects, and construction materials used for federally funded infrastructure projects are produced in the United States, unless otherwise exempt or subject to an approved waiver. There's specific federal coordinated regulations under 2 CFR 184. We've provided some hyperlinks in regards to BABA, but I am in works now and have received a proposal for a BABA specific training for contractors, development entities, municipalities, state agencies, and I'm hoping that we will finalize that contract in the very next 2 to 3 weeks, and that will be a live recorded presentation that will also be made available to you all and everyone that I just mentioned as a resource as to how to comply with BABA. Now, some of you might think, Miguel, you said infrastructure. We're not opening up the ground. We're not putting in water or sewer. Well, in the ultimate wisdom of our federal legislators, infrastructure includes housing. Next slide. Boy, I need new glasses. The Build America, Buy America program rolled out in various stages since 2022. And as you can see in the light blue highlight, the recovery housing programs started being impacted in obligations, meaning when HUD contracted with the state the funding on or after August 23rd, 2023. At that point, that program year or fiscal year or program year 23, it was focused on iron and steel. In 2024, there was construction materials, and in 2025, there is now, it's not listed, it says not listed construction materials, but it's expanding. And in 2026, I think it's supposed to say manufactured products. So it's going to be critical that I believe we should be conservative and proactive in treating all of our projects to comply with BABA across the board so that we don't have to worry about what pool of funds, because it's an aggregate pool that we have to allocate from. And at the end of the day, the Build America, Buy America program is designed to help generate and create employment opportunities for other American residents in the United States. Go next slide, please. Labor standards. There were these two fun guys, Davis and Bacon, a long time ago, that worked out a bipartisan program to assure that projects funded with federal funds met minimum wage and fringe benefit requirements for the contractors and subcontractors. Davis-Bacon is the federal labor standard. In Connecticut, many of you might know, we have the state prevailing wage. If we utilize both state and federal fundings in a project, the higher of the two are applicable, meaning the state prevailing wages, which is modified every year, July 1st. Some of you might have heard that I have had agita based on the amount of increases that we've had in the last couple of years. But basically, Davis-Bacon will apply in regards to the construction and alterations and repairs of the facilities and the housing. This is a very old number, but when federal funding exceeds $2,000 is what we're looking at, the prevailing wages. We do have to be sensitive to assure that in some communities, they also have a living wage, like New Haven and Hartford, that again, Davis-Bacon raised wages are equal to or more than that living wage. Next slide, please. Aging in place is a very important issue for us here in the Department of Housing. So the American with Disabilities Act, we like to think of ourselves as forward thinking. We understand we're all aging, we all have needs, and the ADA is an amazing act that is very diverse, I have learned in my short career. Common issues with non-compliance with regulations are wheelchair access to to bathrooms, in the sense showers, all showers in a shelter. There's not enough turnaround. There's maybe humps. Um, there might not be grab bars or a stabilization area for the person in a wheelchair to be able to utilize. And this one just came up. True story. The height of a toilet is also an ADA requirement. I would love to do a survey. How many people know what an ADA height requirement of a toilet should be? Is it A, 15 inches? Is it B, more than 17 inches? Please enter in your chat. I thought it'd be a fun little quiz. But participation, let me continue. Participation in HUD programs by faith-based organizations, common issues resulting in an ineligible status is including a requirement of the residents or clients to attend faith-based meetings. So again, we want to have conversations. This is about education. This is about assuring compliance, that we're matching the resource to the right program. Next slide, please. Did anyone, before any questions, did anyone respond with the size of the toilet?
We have two correct responses, Miguel.
We had two correct. Congratulations. That was that actually did just come up 2 days ago, and it's important to know these things, and this is the level of detail that we are going to be looking at in your projects and in your proposals to assure compliance in a variety of different ways. So Diana was my handler, and I think, how did I do, Diana?
I think you did great, and we still have 35 minutes for questions.
Wonderful. I see Mr.
I think we've got the first one. John
Hamilton, please.
I had a question. I mean, this is fantastic, and this is something that we've needed a long time. And I know in the past, HUD had actually had people not have transitional housing. They eliminated that, and recovery housing was actually held against people on the continuum for eligibility for permanent housing. Now, this model looks like it's not going to take that under account formally, but informally, I'm just questioning if somebody gets into recovery housing and they know they're in stable housing, and I don't know who can answer this on this call, but will that be held against them since they're in stable housing for qualifying and eligibility and prioritizing them on the list for permanent supportive housing?
John, I'm curious if you're thinking about the HUD eligibility requirements based on homeless definitions?
Correct.
So the same HUD definitions would be in effect for all programming, right? So coming from an institution, if they were in treatment and housed, let's say, at a hospital or something like that, receiving treatment, it would be based on same as every other housing program that we work through in our homeless response system, that 90 days matters, right? So if they were in treatment for more than 90 days, their homeless status would go away. If they were homeless prior to entering treatment and are in treatment for less than 90 days, then their homeless status would continue along their housing. Does that Does that answer your
Well, for
question, John?
clarification, this does disqualify them then for permanent supportive housing.
For PSH through our CAN system, yes,
Got it.
those HUD definitions would remain in effect.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
John, your questions illustrated why coordination with the continuum of care matters, right? And why it's important to have conversations with folks around their needs and their goals. Because, you know, PSH is a different setting than a, transitional. Transitional settings are perhaps, from an outcomes perspective, suited for folks that are going to exit those settings within 24 months. But we do see some folks with substance use who need like a PSH recovery supported setting. And we see more of those programs being stood up as well, permanent supportive recovery housing settings that are focused on the peer support and SUD services. We have some projects that are doing that.
Thank you.
I see a hand up for Jennifer. And
Hi,
Jennifer, I'm not going to
yes.
pronounce your last name, but it's
Don't dare,
lovely.
Miguel. Don't dare. Okay. Hi, everyone. Hi, Miguel. And Miguel, this question is probably directed to you. Jennifer Chudukowicz from SCAD. Can this team take us through sort of the ideal sequence of events in order to be as successful and efficient as possible with this funding and this process?
Would you like to talk about an acquisition rehab type of a project?
Sure, that's a great start.
Okay, we'll use that as an example. So we're going to use Diana is a service provider. Diana has a property abutting her program site and says, hey, this site is going to be great, Miguel. I would like to buy it. The sellers are friendly and are willing to work with us. We would have to go through a NEPA process and an application, but the NEPA process has to identify the whole scope of the work that's being proposed. And we need to also have a hazardous material or a environmental an ESA, environmental assessment, completed by a licensed environmental professional. There has to be a little blurb and some magic words inside your option agreement or purchase and sale document that basically says you can't pass go, you can't buy this property until the environmental review is completed and we received an authorization to use grant funds. Now, I understand in the market that we're in that folks, we're in a seller's market still. So people may not want to delay their sales by 75 to 90 days. But we need to complete that review. Now, options that could happen. Well, maybe you decide to buy the property yourself. And then you want to say, hey, as you saw, can you help us fix it? Rehabilitation is an eligible activity. Again, we have to do the environmental review and we need to know the scope of work. We'd have to go through the procurement process, a fair and open process, and we would have to, bid it out, review with our architectural team to assure that we have compliance. We're really going to focus on the ADA requirements and assure that, your architectural and engineering team know what they're doing. From there, we close. The closing on an application to a financial closing a best case scenario is 6 months before construction begins. A challenge could be is that maybe Diana started working with a funding agency on her project and put herself into an agreement that the program was going to be up and running at a certain point in time that doesn't align with our funding and construction timetable. Now, we're always welcome and happy to have our commissioner, our Diana's supervisor, Steve, yourselves be part of a conversation with your other funders to see if there is some flexibility to meet their needs and demands with our funding. Sometimes there is, sometimes there isn't. But was that kind of helpful?
It was. And then at what point, and forgive me because I was furiously writing notes.
Don't worry, this is being recorded.
Yes, I know. All right. So technical assistance from the Fletcher Group. At what point is that after the DOH closing? Or is there a Fletcher Group assistance portion that could happen prior to the closing?
What kind of go ahead, Elaine.
Yeah, so we are able to provide assistance to folks receiving HUD funding. So if we were to provide assistance to you, it would be through Miguel and Diana until you are an official awardee of the funding. What I'll say about that acquisition rehabilitation project, I'm just going to give you an example of someone that we worked with. In New Mexico, they did an environmental review. I don't know, Miguel, what's the typical cost for an environmental review in Connecticut?
It could be, well, it depends on a lot of various factors, but it could be on the high side, $12,000 to $15,000.
Okay. And sometimes, by the way, there's funding available, right, through the state for environmental reviews, like pre-development kind of planning type grants. And I don't know if that's something here, but they did an environmental review. And when they applied for the funding for acquisition, they also included the rehabilitation that needed to happen to meet the environmental standards, right? So in some ways, it's almost a protection to you to do these things in advance, because at the end of the day, when licensing comes in, those things will have to have been rehabbed, right? So having that environmental review is a protection. But that's what typically happens is you do that environmental review and then you apply for the funding, and part of the budget becomes, the things that have to be rehabbed in the funding. And if there's questions along the way, we're able to join up with Miguel and Diana to support it. And then on the implementation side, work with you directly once funding is awarded. And all of those things have to be kind of defined, and managed, but yeah.
Right. Thank you. This little scenario was helpful. Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome.
We have Kathleen. Kathleen, please, you unmute yourself.
Hi, Miguel. How are you?
I'm well, thank you very much.
I have a question about the environmental scan. If there's been a scan performed on a building, is there sort of a statute of limitations of how long that scan is good for?
Yes, that's an excellent question, and it's gonna be a multi-part answer. So, if you have had what they reference as a phase 1 environmental study, ESA, for federal funds, it has a shelf life of 6 months, and then it has to be updated for an additional 6 months. Now, if you happen to have done an environmental review, a NEPA level review, and had gotten and let's say that you were working with us or the Hartford field office. Some organizations might have gotten congressionally designated set-aside funds in the last couple of years, maybe. But if you had done an environmental review and it was tied to your project site in some way, that potentially may have a shelf life of up to 5 years that will help us expedite that process. There are some circumstances and nuances, but that's the best answer that I can give you.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
You're more than welcome. Please don't be shy. This is an opportunity for us to really hear from you and ask questions. We have representatives from HUD. We have the amazing team of the Fletcher Group who speaks your language. I am not a recovery housing fluent individual. I finance things. I build things, but the programmatic aspect of things, I will admit I am limited, and Diana is my handler, my translator, and then I have the expertise provided by HUD from the Fletcher Group. Alan, please.
Hello, Miguel. Question regarding dollars already spent. So if we spent dollars on an owned property, how would that work? Or does this have to be dollars not spent?
That is an interesting and complex question. And I'm going to give you my HR answer. It depends on what the activity is and when it was done. I use an acronym that is utilized and it's been around for ages. RADAR, RADAR. Reimbursements are allowable, documentable, allocable, and reasonable. I had a situation recently when someone says to me, "But Miguel, I bought this property and I want to get reimbursed for it." Sure, let me take a look at when you bought it. It was 7 years ago. That is not reasonable. The project did not even exist. So we couldn't allow that. Now, if you met procurement requirements, let's say something simpler like you had an environmental test done in the last year, an environmental study or testing would be considered an exempt activity if it's within a reasonable time frame, 6 to 12 months, then that could be considered as long as we meet the radar tests. That reimbursements are allowable, documentable, allocable, and reasonable.
Thank you.
You're more than welcome, Alan. And if you have a specific scenario you'd like to email us on, we'll be happy to comment and respond. Is this when we start picking people, Diana? We start picking people?
I think no question is too silly, so we're open.
Yeah.
We've got 15 more minutes and we'll be patient if you want to think of what you'd like to ask. Jennifer. Please.
All right, I'm gonna go again since everybody's
Yes,
being
please.
quiet. How much funding are we talking about and how long is it around for?
Yeah, so I think, what is it? It's 6.6, right, Miguel? That's available.
Minus a little administrative fee of about 5%. So if we just do the simple math, just a little over $6 million. And something I threw out there in a conversation was, well, how do we make it equitable across the state? And Diana came up with a great idea saying, well, Miguel, there are 5 territories, 5 districts, 5
5
what was the
regions within the
5
DEMIS footprint.
5 regions within the DEMIS footprint. So we would love to be able to do one project within each region and share the opportunity and the resources equitably. That would be my first and greatest hope. But obviously, depending on project readiness, need, we may have to do more than one project in one region. But that was the most equitable solution that we all agreed to, that Diana made the recommendation for. So blame her.
And then just a quick follow-up, given the timeline and your acknowledgement about, like, we're still certainly not positioned as nonprofits to be as responsive in this market as we would like to be. Given the timeline, how long is this money around for? And I know you've got it divvied up in the region. Are you expecting, or do you have a deadline that you have to spend this money by?
Well, what we are doing is, after today, taking all your feedback, checking in with HUD, the field office, and the Fletcher Group. We are going to finalize a NOFO, NOFA that we anticipate releasing in early second quarter. So that would be, we're hoping before the end of March, but it will probably be mid-March to mid-April. We plan on doing another meeting, virtual roundtable, to introduce the NOFO to the group and to explain the timetable there. The Fletcher Group is going to help us, and I'm going to transfer this part of the question to our hostess, Milena, to talk a little bit about, I'll use the word screening or pre-qualifying.
Yeah, so we have developed, and we'll be able to at the next roundtable speak to this, some application questions based on the scoring criteria, right? So we're in the process of reviewing all of those. Those will be obvious in the application process, right? And so the roundtable at that point will be focused around, here are the questions and here's what we're looking for in the responses. Right? Between now and then, if you wanted to prepare, right, and start talking in your communities, I'd really be thinking about partnerships. Those are probably the thing, the components that are hardest to engage. If you get money for a project, the, acquisition and rehabilitation is going to be a component of your budget. But you've got to account for the services, you've got to be able to speak to the model, you got to be able to speak to the partnerships, right? So there was a slide in there where we talked about the domains. Those are kind of the domains of the questions that we're looking at. Are you able to define your community's need? Are you able to explain how your program meets those needs and has demonstrated outcomes toward that process? Do you have the partners in place and support in place to move the project forward? site control is like the biggest like readiness factor, right? Like we've identified a site, there's a process for moving things along. There are people for moving things along. Your model is based on peers and embedded in the community, and you have those relationships in place. Those are the sort of things that are about pre-qualifying. And, we've been meeting with folks alongside Miguel and Diana that are interested and have specific questions. So that's another way that we could help answer individual questions about the process.
Kathleen, you have another question, please.
Hi, is there any approval needed by the municipality? I'm just thinking about room and board licenses, and some areas are pretty saturated with housing, congregate care and treatment programs. So is there I know you mentioned something about the DOH field offices helping, but is there something that we would need to do on our end in terms of the municipality?
There is, you are still subject to local zoning, planning, permitting requirements. In some cases, you'll also have to have conversations, depending on the project, with a local historical commission. You'll also may have to have, depending on the municipality and location, conversations with regards to flood flood management, wetland, uh, water aquifers. So it's always, this is why we encourage you, have a conversation with us. We can literally go through, what we do is a development engagement. It's a low cost, no threshold, no cost, nothing up front for you to start a conversation. And I've had this conversation with some of you, and that in the background I start doing my little magical, Inspector Gadget detective work. And there are free resources both on the state websites and also on the federal. For example, one called the NEPA Assist. And you can go in that website, you could type in, I always tell people, type in your own home address and learn what's around you. You might be surprised, in regards to, and if I do that with my own home, I know I have wetlands in the back of me, I have conservation land in front of me, and it tells me a little bit of the history of what's happened in your neighborhood, especially if you're in a mixed use neighborhood. We helped an organization called Bethel in Milford, and they are in the midst of planning. They've purchased the land, and they came to us in this development engagement and said, can you help us make a choice as to what site? And we said no, but what we can do is a 10,000-foot review in identifying the challenges of developing each site. It took us, myself and Dr. Mathila, about an hour and a half. We presented a small PowerPoint presentation, and we talked about the challenges of developing one parcel versus the other. And then they were informed and they were able to make their decision.
Kathleen, you bring up an important question, because I think nationally, one of the things that we deal with is the not in my backyard attitude of NIMBY, and local housing regulations can often be used to deter those types of establishments in their areas. So yes, you're subject to municipal processes, and having, friends on the team helps us integrate into communities and engage project support in the form of funding or facilitating the zoning requirements. So, the good neighbor collaborative approach is one that we always recommend in that regard, and helping people understand. Recovery homes take on many different forms. And other than your level 4, it's not really a medical facility, right? Even though some folks try to make it that way, the idea is for it to be a home environment rather than a medical setting, which sometimes is a tension for funding. But it also impacts local zoning and licensing and that sort of thing. So, we work through those conversations with folks. Ideally, you're aware of those things in a pre-development process, right? Because you're going to want to mitigate that in your timeline, or it might just not be a pass go situation. And you'd want to know that too. But those are the sort of things that, the planning process helps inform.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. Appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Do we have any questions in the chat?
Nothing in the chat, Miguel.
Not too much in the chat. Silence is an affirmation of how brilliant we were and how thorough we provided the information. But in all seriousness, I do want to be respectful of all your time. Happy to return a few moments of your time to you all. This will be recorded and will be available for your viewing pleasure at any time in the next 24 hours. We will be sending out a notice and letting you know where we're going to get it posted. Any final words, Grant and the Fletcher Group?
No, just want to reiterate what you said, Miguel. Thank you so much for the great presentation and appreciate everyone being on today.
Just want to let folks know I put my email in the chat. If there are questions that come up after this, you're sitting and eating your lunch and you think, oh, I should have asked that question, please don't hesitate to reach out and we'll get you some answers.